Sounds True and Windhorse Productions bring you Secrets of the World. It is said that the old and the very, very young and the ones we call whisperers hear most clearly of all. If you wish to hear as well as they do and discover the secrets waiting for you, you must learn to open your ears from the inside out, travel all over without moving about, and make friends with silence.
Long time ago, over 1100 years in fact, there lived in Baghdad in Iraq a very wise, brave, passionate man called Al-Hallaj. Al-Hallaj went on a long journey to discover the secret of life, and he found that secret, which is that each and every one of us contains the whole universe and everything in it in the fire of our inmost heart. He ran through the streets of Baghdad, crying out in Arabic, An al-Haq, An al-Haq, I am the supreme truth, I am the supreme truth, longing to give the secret away to everyone who could hear him. And when he cried out, I am the supreme truth, he didn't mean that only he was the supreme reality. He meant that everyone who'd come to his knowledge would find out that they too were the truth he was talking about. But those who heard him were scared of the greatness of what he was saying, and so they took him and put him in jail. But nothing could break his wonderful spirit, or the joy that possessed him, because he knew that he had found the secret of life for all beings. So he endured his jail with great courage. Then they took him out and they executed him in the main square of Baghdad, hoping to kill his great secret forever. But the pieces of his body made out on the ground the Arabic letters, An al-Haq, I am the supreme truth. So the great secret could not be smothered. Again they were afraid, and they took the pieces of the body and they burnt them, and they threw the ashes of Al-Hallaj's body onto the river Tigris. What happened? A miracle happened. The ashes formed in golden fire on the river Tigris the letters, An al-Haq, I am the supreme truth. So the secret was out forever. 300 years later, a great poet who loved Al-Hallaj wrote a poem called The Conference of the Birds, in which he describes a group of birds who set out to discover the supreme secret of life. This poem has been retold by Anne Baring in a tale called The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time. One day, the earth was feeling very sad. she sent a message to her birds all over the world and said to them, "I need your help. Please will you gather together in one place so I can speak to you?" So the birds came to listen to the earth. They came from the north and the south, the east and the west. They flew secretly at night, so that only children and night creatures would hear the whisper of their wings. And as they flew, they called to each other and asked, "What does the earth want? What can the earth need? Why does she want to speak to us?" At last, they reached the place the earth had named. It was a mossy glade in the midst of a forest, and high above the trees a circle of snowy mountains glistened in the light of the full moon. Here the birds settled with a great twittering and chattering. There were the great crested crane and the pink flamingo from Africa, the tiny fragile hummingbird and the golden crested wren, the bright parrot from South America, the tree sparrow from China. The Arctic tern had flown many miles from the far north. The falcon, the eagle, and the great gliding condor had come from the high mountains and from wild, desolate places. There were birds with strange faces, like the owl, and birds which sang beautifully like the nightingale and the thrush, magical birds like the paradise kingfisher and the fairy bluebird, and birds everyone knows, like the swallow. There were hundreds of thousands of birds from everywhere on earth, and when the birds had told each other their names and the places they had come from, they ate and drank the food and water which the earth had thoughtfully prepared for them, and then they settled down to listen to what the earth had to say. At first, they heard a low rumble like distant thunder, and then, from far, far away, but so close that it seemed to come from inside their hearts, they heard a voice. It was very faint and weak, and it spoke to them gently and lovingly, saying, "Be not afraid of me, my birds. You have been part of my life for millions of years, and I have given you food and shelter during this long time. But now I need your help. My great seas and rivers are filled with poisonous wastes which hurt the fish and the other small creatures that live in my waters. My tall forests are dying or are being cut down. My sky is torn, and the sun's burning rays injure me. My sea creatures, the whales and dolphins and turtles, are hunted and killed in my oceans. Poisons are buried deep in my body. In many places, my people are killing each other because they believe their part of the earth belongs to them alone. They make weapons from my body to destroy each other. Millions of children are hungry and hurt and dying because of these wars, and they are taught to hate and fear each other as enemies. Few are those who can hear the voice of the earth and listen to my cry for help. But you have seen all these things, and you know them to be true. Will you help me?" The birds set up a cry like a rushing wind. "How can we help you?" The earth spoke again. This time, her voice was clear and strong. "Are you brave enough to go on a special journey to save my life? Are you clever enough to find the place that lies east of the sun and west of the moon, over the edge of time, beyond the 7 valleys, the place that is neither here nor there, but everywhere? Are you strong enough to break the spell of the monsters of the seven valleys. For my sake, will you dive to the depths of the sea that is unlike all other seas, and look for the garden where there is a house with hidden treasure? In that house there is a great being, one who is never old nor ever young, who is the life of all life. Speak to this being. Say, the earth is in danger and has sent you for help. Then bring me back the message you are given. The birds looked at each other in bewilderment. They had never heard the voice of the earth before. They knew nothing about the great being over the edge of time beyond the seven valleys, and they had no idea how to reach the garden in the depths of the sea that was not like any other sea. Some of them thought the whole idea was a dream. Others said it was silly to expect birds from the earth to fly so far away to find something which might not be there. Still others thought they might not have the strength for such a difficult journey and would die on the way. After a great deal of flying up and down and dusting of feathers and chattering, the hoopoe flew into the center of the glade and settled on a small tree stump. The birds could see the fluttering of her black and white wings and the beautiful pink crest like a crown on her head. On her breast was a glowing ruby. On her long curved beak were strange letters which the birds could not understand. "Dear birds," she began, "I am a messenger of the world invisible. I know the way to the garden beyond the edge of time. I have entered the house of the treasure and seen the great being whom I serve and whose name is written on my beak. I can guide you to the place that is east of the sun and west of the moon. I have flown the lonely and dangerous way through the seven valleys to the treasure hidden in the depths of that sea which is unlike all other seas. I have seen through the 100,000 veils of light and darkness that lie between us and the shining splendor of the great being. And to make this journey, you will need the courage of an eagle, the night vision of an owl, the wisdom of a raven, and the gentleness of a dove." Then she told them a story. "Long, long ago," she said, "in the first days, in the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years, the great being who is the life of all life, dropped a golden feather on the earth. It was as delicate as a spider's web, as silken as a butterfly's wing, and as radiant as a star. Every bird carried within its heart the same magical golden feather, so that each was secretly linked to all the others and to the great being who gave it to the earth. But soon, each bird made a picture of this feather and began to believe that his or her picture was different from every other bird's, and some began to think that theirs was special and better than anyone else's, and so they began to quarrel with each other as to whose picture was best. They forgot the real feather hidden inside their hearts which linked them to each other and to the great being, and they began to fight great battles with each other and forgot that they were all children of the earth and that without the earth they would die. When the hoopoe had finished, the birds began excitedly to discuss the golden feather and the journey to the great being. At first, they decided they would all go together. But when they began to reflect on how long and difficult the journey might be, they hesitated, and in spite of their goodwill, they began one by one to excuse themselves. The nightingale said, "I love to sing all night long to the rose in the gardens of the world. If I go on this journey, the rose might die without my song. How could I leave her for a single night? The hoopoe said, "What good will your singing be if there are no gardens left and no roses to fill them?" Then, dressed in brilliant green with a ring of gold around her neck, the parrot spoke. "If I left the warm, moist jungles where I have lived for thousands of years, how would I survive in another kind of place? What is the point of making this journey when I may not be able to live in that garden, let alone find my way back?" The hoopoe replied, "Where will you live when your tall, rich forests are cut down?" The peacock spoke next, splendidly arrayed in feathers of 100,000 colours. This way and that way he turned, showing himself in all his glory to the assembled birds. I think the earth is exaggerating. I'm an expert and know better than the earth what's going on in the seas and the forests, the deserts and cities of the world. This great being she talks of may be just a dream. There is no proof that what she says is true. The hoopoe said, "Oh, foolish peacock, whose splendid dress hides a cold heart and a deaf ear. This is the first time the earth has ever spoken to her birds. We do not need proof. We need to listen to her voice and to trust our heart." Then it was the turn of the duck. "I live in the water of ponds and rivers, and in them I find my food. But the rivers are no longer bright and sparkling. Poison water from factories at their edge pours into them. The fish sometimes die, and the water is no longer good for me. I will come with you for the sake of all the ducks and water birds in the world, and for the sake of the earth." The hoopoe said, "Thank you, duck, for speaking up in this way. Your courage will give strength to others." Now the partridge added his voice. "I have been injured in the wars that lay waste the earth. My wife is dead, my children starving and homeless. My heart is burnt to ashes with hate for those who did these things. My only wish is for revenge, so that others will suffer as I have suffered. Yet because of my pain, I can understand the pain the earth is feeling, and I too will go with you to bring back a message from the great being to help her." "This journey may heal your heart," said the hoopoe. Suddenly, the hawk, fierce and proud and dressed for battle, swooped towards the hoopoe. His talk was always of armies, weapons, victory. "I don't know why you weep and wail about war. There's always been war, and there always will be. It is necessary to kill one's enemies and to suffer in order to win. Why should I face the dangers of the way when there are more glorious battles to fight here?" "You stain the earth with blood," replied the hoopoe. "Why not be a warrior for peace instead of for war? If you are as brave as your boast, come with us on this journey." Then the tall grey heron stepped forward. "I am so gentle that no one complains of me. I stand at the edge of the water, dreaming my dreams. I am too delicate for the journey you speak of." The hoopoe answered, "Dreams can take you away from your true path in life. Come with us to the sea which contains all wonders, all treasures. Then your dreams may come true." Next, the hummingbird spoke, feeble in body, but tender in heart, trembling like a flame from head to foot. She said, "Do you think that a tiny little bird like me could make her way to the garden of the great being? A hummingbird could never do it." The hoopoe answered her, "How do you know what you can accomplish unless you start out? Sometimes the weak have more courage and endurance than the strong. Take heart and join us. Then what a story you will have to tell your children." The owl fluffed out her feathers and spoke. I am a bird who was old before the great flood. I have witnessed many things since the beginning of time. It is too late for us, feeble birds that we are, to do anything. There is no point in trying. There are too few of us who care. Wise owl, most respected of birds, said the hoopoe, it is never too late. Where danger is greatest, there is the greatest hope for change. After all the birds had had their say, the hoopoe spoke once more. If you lose yourself in a glass of water, how will you dive to the depths of the sea beyond the edge of time? If you cannot light a tiny flame, how will you reach the blazing fire at the heart of life? For this quest, you must have the heart of a lion. You have forgotten the golden feather in your hearts, which floats like a song on the breath of the great being. If you love the earth as much as she has loved you, set out with fiery heart towards the goal, making that your greatest joy. Now the birds felt a change of heart. Their love for the earth lifted them up. The idea of the great being beyond the edge of time filled their minds with wonder. Everyone trusted the hoopoe because she was the messenger of the world invisible and knew the way to the garden, and because the name of the great being was written on her beak. All the birds listened as she spoke. We have 7 valleys to cross, and only after we have crossed them all shall we find the garden in the depths of the silver sea. Each valley is ruled by an invisible monster who lives inside a high mountain. Everything in the valley lies under its magic spell. Once, long ago, the monsters were one with the great being, but pain and fear came between them and separated them. They carry a great wound in their hearts and have forgotten who they are. Because they are wounded, they wound others. In their loneliness and pain, they have become dangerous and terrible and as hard as stone. There are many ways of crossing these valleys, and not all birds fly alike. We shall make the journey together, but each must find his or her own path through the valleys. At last, the trembling birds set out. The first to follow the hoopoe was the goldfinch, whose wings shimmered in the sunlight. After her came the fairy bluebird. All those who had spoken, and more, many more, were there. So great was their number that the noise of their wings was like the roarings of water in spring as they rushed down the mountains toward the sea. As the birds left the earth, they looked back and saw their home shining in space like a precious jewel. Soon they saw ahead of them the great darkness of the first valley, the Valley of Doubt. Panic spread among them. Some sank to the ground in bedraggled heaps and said they did not want to go on. One of them cried out, "We can't go on this journey. Our wings and feathers are not strong enough. If we fly into this valley, it is certain we will never find our way through it." And away they flew back to earth. The rest crowded anxiously around the hoopoe. Suddenly, the nightingale and the turtle dove began to sing. And they sang a melody so sweet that all who heard it were enchanted and once again took courage. The hoopoe then said to them, "The magic spell of the monster of doubt fills the valley with a thick grey fog which has the smell of stagnant water. This fog will ooze from the mountain and wrap itself around you, blinding you and making you lose your way. It will settle on your wings, and they will become wet and heavy, so you can hardly fly. The invisible monster will confuse you with the soft whispering of its voice. At first, you will not be able even to hear it or know which direction it is coming from. But if you listen very carefully, you will hear these words sounding as if they were spoken by you in your own voice. You are not good enough to find the treasure. You are not clever enough to break my spell. You are not strong enough to reach the garden. You will not survive this journey. Do not listen to these whispers. They are not your true voice, but the voice of the monster who pretends to be you. Remember the clear music of the nightingale and the gentle song of the turtle dove. Trust yourselves, for that is the magic that will break the spell of the monster of doubt. Remember the golden feather, radiant as a star in your hearts. The birds plunged bravely into the darkness of the first valley, the Valley of Doubt. At once, they were lost in a thick, murky fog that blinded them and weighed down their bright feathers. They smelt the smell of stagnant water. At first, they heard nothing at all, and then so faintly that it was like the fall of a leaf came the soft whispering voice of doubt speaking with their own voice. You are not good enough to find the treasure. You are not clever enough to break my spell. You are not strong enough to reach the garden. You will never survive this journey. But the birds remembered the hoopoe's words. Even the quail, so hesitant and full of doubts, remembered. She remembered to trust herself, and suddenly saw the golden feather clear as the sun in her heart. She found her true voice and said to the monster, "You cannot fill me with the fog of doubt. I will not listen to your words. I am good enough. I am clever enough. I am strong enough to reach the great being." As she said these words, her wet, dragging wings grew lighter. Through the wisps of fog, she clearly saw the hoopoe flying in front of her and knew she had broken the spell of the monster of doubt. But a few birds could not tell the difference between their voice and the voice of the monster, and their wings grew heavy and could not carry them through the valley. The birds that remained flew on into the darkness of the second valley, the Valley of False Dreams. The air was thick and sweet and suffocating, and soon they could not see their way. They heard the muffled voice of the monster speaking from inside the mountain. "Follow me," it said, "and I will show you a quicker, easier way to the garden of the great being. Follow me, and I will give you a special drink that will make you brave and strong. Come my way, and I will give you dreams that will make you forget your fear and loneliness." "Do not listen to this voice," cried the hoopoe, "or you will fall into a deep sleep. Do not drink what the monster offers, or you will forget who you are, and your life will be lost." But the birds felt thirsty and weak after their journey through the Valley of Doubt. Invisible talons held out strange things for them to drink, which smelt sweet and delicious. It seemed safe to taste them. The heron took a sip of the deadly drug. The hoopoe's warning began to fade from his memory. He fought hard to stay awake, but he was very weak and called to the other birds for help. Then he saw that they too were slipping away into sleep. With his long beak, he tore the drink away from the other birds. He said to the monster, "We do not want your false dreams. We love the earth and want to help her. We will not forget who we are." and he broke the spell of the monster and flew out of the valley. But some birds, who had drunk too much of the drug that tasted so sweet, forgot who they were and fell asleep in the valley of false dreams, and they were left behind. The birds flew on into the darkness of the third valley, the Valley of Envy. At once, they could feel the powerful spell of the monster of this valley. Each bird longed to be like some other bird. The hummingbird wanted to be strong like the eagle. The eagle wanted to be clever like the owl. The owl wanted to be beautiful like the peacock. The peacock wanted to sing like the nightingale. The nightingale wanted to be powerful like the hawk, and the hawk wanted to be more powerful than all the other birds put together. As these thoughts attacked them, they felt their feathers caught in the meshes of the monster's invisible nets, like the nets of the hunters they feared on earth. From inside the mountain, the monster's shrill voice mocked them, saying, "You are too helpless and too weak to break my spell. You will not free yourselves from the nets of envy, because they are as strong as iron." The birds thrashed and struggled in the nets. Even the eagle panicked. "If only I could be like the condor," he cried. "If only I was stronger, faster, braver, I could free myself from these nets." Then, from far, far away, they heard the hoopoe's faint voice. "Remember the feather in your hearts. Let go of your wish to be someone else. Be true to yourselves, and the nets of envy will dissolve." The hoopoe's voice startled them, for in their terror they had forgotten all about her. As they remembered the golden feather in their hearts, the tiniest, weakest birds, the hummingbird and the wren, found a way to cut the threads of the nets and make holes so that the bigger birds could squeeze through them and fly free. But some birds had damaged their wings beyond repair and were unable to fly, and they stayed in the valley. The birds who were free flew on into the darkness of the fourth valley, the Valley of Hate. From far away, they saw a volcano belching fire from its cone. A wind like a tornado roared towards them. Flaming rivers of molten lava flowed down the sides of the mountain, burning everything in their path. The birds smelt the acrid stink of the monster's breath as its harsh cry exploded across the valley. "No one can stand against me," roared the monster. "Where hate rules, nothing lives. Your way lies through me, and you will be burnt to cinders as you fly." The heat of the monster's flames scorched the air and made them feel faint and sick as they drew nearer and nearer to the fiery mountain. Clouds of white-hot sparks raced towards them. The partridge gasped in pain as the sparks fell on his feathers, but bravely he flew on through the searing fire. Although he had suffered terribly in the wars on earth, he did not surrender to the spell of hate, and his courage inspired all the other birds. "Are you still alive?" cried the hoopoe. "Yes," they chorused, "but our feathers are burnt and blackened." The hoopoe encouraged them, saying, "If you have survived at all, you have broken the spell of the monster of hate." But some birds lay dead on the floor of the valley. Now the birds who had survived followed the hoopoe into the darkness of the fifth valley, the Valley of Power. They saw a landscape as cold and empty as a dead planet. The air was so dry and thin that the birds gasped for breath. Fear, like an invisible iron hand, clutched at their throats. The monster's roar was like an avalanche. "I control everything. I am always right. I will give you all the power, all the control, all the knowledge you want, so others will have to obey you. You will never again be weak, helpless, ignorant birds." The birds hesitated. They began to feel paralyzed by the black, invisible rays of the monster of power. The peacock was unable to move. He felt his heart growing heavier and colder, as if it were turning to stone. "Wake up!" shouted the hoopoe. "Wake up, before it is too late!" The peacock heard her voice as if it came from very far away at the bottom of the sea. He flapped his wings as hard as he could and jumped up and down. But on his own he could not break the spell of the monster of power, and he cried out for help. At that moment, hundreds of tiny sparrows, ordinary little birds whom no one usually noticed, heard his cry and flew between him and the paralyzing ray of the monster of power. By their desperate efforts to save him, the peacock was freed from the terrible spell. But other birds could not resist the black rays of the monster. They were turned to stone and could not fly out of the valley. Now the birds who were left approached the darkness of the sixth valley, the valley of cruelty. The hoopoe warned them. The spell of the monster who rules this valley is very strong and hard to see. You will have to find the courage to face your own cruelty. That will not be difficult, thought the hawk. I am very brave. As the birds flew into the valley of cruelty, wave after wave of winged creatures screamed out of caves in the mountain to attack them. Half bird, half demon, each was armed with cruel talons and stings as sharp as needles. Their venom poisoned the birds, so that many fell to the ground as though dead. The birds shook with fear. They heard a voice in their hearts saying, "It's all right to be cruel. It's fun to be cruel. It's brave to be cruel." The hawk realized he had never fought a battle like this one. Suddenly, he saw that some of them were the ghosts of birds he had killed in battle. He was face to face with his own cruelty, which he had never seen before. But because he was very brave, he called out to the monster of the valley, "I will not fight any more. Let me be friends with my former enemies." From inside the mountain, the monster answered him, "O hawk, do you think one bird can break the spell of 10,000 years? Do you think these demon birds will stop fighting because you invite them to be friends? You may be brave, but you are a fool." But the hawk cried out, "I am now a warrior on behalf of life." Then all the birds gave a great shout, and it shattered the mountain where the monster of cruelty lived, and the terrible spell of cruelty was broken forever. But in the battle with the demon creatures, many thousands of birds had perished, and their corpses littered the valley. The few birds who had survived flew on into the darkness of the seventh and last valley, the valley of despair. The hoopoe said, "Do not fall under the spell of the monster's voice speaking in your heart. Listen carefully for the voice of the nightingale, and look out for the ruby on my breast. This is your last trial, and the most difficult, for this monster has the deepest wound, and is more terrible than all the others. The birds could see nothing. The darkness was as black as a raven's wing. The monster's breath squeezed them like a python. It made them feel numb and cold. The owl felt the power of the monster seize her like the tentacles of an octopus, pulling her deeper and deeper into an icy blackness colder than the coldest water she had ever felt on earth. Then she heard the monster speaking with her own voice. "You have failed the quest. Your journey is useless. There is no garden. There is no treasure. There is no great being over the edge of time. There is no message to bring back to the earth. You will disappear into darkness forever." The monster's voice made the owl feel sick with horror. But just as she felt herself on the verge of slipping into darkness, she heard the soaring voice of the nightingale ring out clear and true. "I sing of joy and light and color and beauty. I sing of following the way of the heart through the 7 valleys. I sing to help you defeat the spell of the monster of despair." And the hoopoe cried aloud to all the birds, "Close your eyes, and you will see a beam of white light, powerful as a laser, pouring into the valley from the garden of the great being." And as she spoke, the ruby on her breast glowed like a pulsing heart in the darkness, and the birds remembered the earth and their love for her. They closed their eyes and saw the bright beam of light. Led by the owl, they began to fly along it. As they flew, they sang a song to the monster of despair, and they told the monster about the garden in the depths of the sea. As they sang, their fear vanished, and the monster, who listened to every word, began to sing too. As it sang, the terrible wound in its heart was healed. Slowly, slowly, the birds saw the darkness dissolve, and the light become stronger and stronger until it was as bright as the sun at midday. And because the birds had healed the monster, none of them stayed behind in the valley of despair. Keeping close to each other for support and comfort, yet at the same time finding their own special way, they came at last to the edge of time and the shore of the great sea that is unlike all other seas. They were very frightened of diving into this sea, but the paradise kingfisher, gleaming in his brilliant blue-green plumage, said he knew how to dive into deep water and begged them to follow him without fear. So, holding their breath, they dived to the depths of those silvery waters which reminded them of their dreams. The waters caressed them gently, and the birds found that they were partly flying and partly swimming through this sea. It was neither as light as air, nor as heavy as water, but clear as crystal, like dew in sunlight. All of a sudden, just as they felt they had reached the end of their strength, they saw the garden, shimmering and glimmering like an emerald at the bottom of the sea. Of all the hundreds of thousands of birds who had started out on the journey, only a few reached the garden. The nightingale was the first to see that it was full of the most beautiful trees and flowers, including his beloved roses, roses fresher and more fragrant than any he had ever seen or imagined. The ground was soft with warm green moss and covered with wild strawberries. Cascades of flowers hung from the trees, and their blossoms scented the air with delicious perfumes. Waterfalls sparkled, and everywhere they heard the humming of bees as they gathered honey. In the middle of the garden was a mound, and they saw a flight of steps leading up it to the house of the treasure. The house was lit up as if the walls were transparent. A great light was shining inside it. Suddenly, the door of the house of the treasure opened, and they saw a tall and majestic figure dressed in a robe like a rainbow. It looked at the huddled birds and said with great tenderness, "Where have you come from, O birds, and what are you doing here? Why have you come here? What do you want, and what can I do for you?" Then the exhausted birds fluttered into life and spoke, their voices faint with awe. "Our guide, the hoopoe, has led us here from the earth far, far away. We have come to bring a message from the earth to the great being who is the life of all life. The earth is very sad and has sent us to ask for help." Then the keeper of the door, having tested their hearts and found them true, gently invited them to enter the house of the treasure. As they climbed the steps, the birds began to tremble, for they stood at the threshold of the majesty that no one can describe. On either side of them, flowers blossomed as they looked at them and filled the air with heavenly perfumes. Overcome with joy and wonder, they saw a blaze of glowing light through the doorway of the house of treasure. There, before them, was the great being they had come across all the worlds to find. The birds crossed the threshold and entered the heart of the great being. It was as if they entered a room of 1,000 dazzling mirrors. Then, slowly, as their eyes grew accustomed to the light, they saw reflected in the mirrors the innermost secret of creation, light streaming into all the forms of life. As they gazed, lost in the splendor of their vision, they knew they were inside the heart of the great being. And each of them knew they were at one and the same time themselves and each other. They were at once the great being and every single tiny shining particle of that life. They saw thousands of dancing suns, each more glorious than the other, thousands of moons and stars, all equally resplendent. They saw that each one was a universe, and that all these worlds blossomed inside the heart of the great being. Then the voice of the great being spoke to them. "In the first days, In the very first days, in the first nights, in the very first nights, in the first years, in the very first years, when everything needed was brought into being by me, the life of all life, I gave to the earth a golden feather, delicate as a spider's web, silken as a butterfly's wing, radiant as a star. I knew that after many millions of years, that feather would bring you to me, in the world invisible, to my garden at the depths of the sea. You listened to the earth. You followed the hoopoe, messenger of the world invisible, to find me at the heart of life. You have asked me for a message to take back to the earth. You yourselves, as you are now, you are the message. You have seen the vision of the treasure. You are no longer helpless, weak, ignorant birds. Now you know your true nature, the divine heart of your being. You know that I am the heart of each one of you, and you are within my heart forever. Now, you can return to the earth, knowing that every atom, every stone, every leaf, every tree of earth is lit with the one secret blazing light that streams from me. Wherever you are, you have only to imagine me, and I will be with you. If ever you are anxious, I will give you strength and wisdom. If ever you are afraid, you have only to imagine my light, and it will stand shining before you. You have flown beyond the edge of time, so you know there is no death, but only one eternal life. Tell all the children of the earth what you have seen, so they will not fear death. Go now, my beloved birds, and tell your story to the earth. And the birds with glorious new plumage, and with the golden feather shining in their hearts, set out for the earth. The journey that had taken so long now flashed by in a second, and they saw that each of the 7 valleys had become as beautiful and richly alive as the garden. The land that had been frozen and blackened and poisoned and scorched by the monster's spell was restored to life, and best of all, the birds who had fallen under the spell of the monsters came alive and flew with their friends towards the earth. Together, they saw the jewel-like beauty of their home coming closer and closer towards them, until suddenly they were at the meeting place of the birds. Once again, they felt the mossy ground beneath their claws, but now it was strewn with flowers glowing like tiny stars. They were welcomed by all the birds who had not made the journey. Then, quietly, they told the earth their story. The earth listened to them, and when they had finished, she said in a gentle voice, "Dear birds, you have saved my life. How can I thank you for what you have done for me and all my life, held under the spell of the monsters of the 7 valleys? You are all my special messengers. Tell your story to my children. If they listen to your voice in their hearts, they will know what to do for me. They will love and protect me for my sake and for the sake of their children and their children's children. They will not fall under the spell of the 7 monsters. One day, each of them will make the journey to the garden in the depths of the sea, and you will be their guide, as the hoopoe was your guide. You will lead them to the house of the treasure and the great being who is the life of all life. Like the hoopoe, you now are the messengers of the world invisible, and the golden feather will shine forever in your hearts. I was born a very, very long time ago, in 1952, in India. So I'm extremely old. But I'm not too old to remember how I discovered the golden feather in my heart when I was a child. That golden feather is the most precious thing you have. It is always there. Nothing can destroy it. Nothing can kill it. Nothing can wipe it away. And when you discover it, it transforms your whole life. Just let me tell you 3 stories in which the beauty of my own golden feather unfolded itself, and I came to taste its wonder and sweetness. When I was a little boy, I lived in the capital of India called Delhi. And Delhi is the wildest town you would ever find. It's full of the craziest people imaginable. Old drunkards dancing in the streets, holy men with ash on their foreheads, maharanis, that is, princesses with veils, fat ladies eating sweets on the sidewalk. You name it, Delhi has got it. Not only is Delhi the craziest city you can imagine, it's also the smelliest city. So you smell tar mixed with beautiful flower smells, mixed with dung, mixed with unbelievable perfume smells, all jumbled and tumbled together so that this huge wave of perfume strikes you from every street corner. I hope you get to Delhi sometime. And if you do, go to 32 Alipur Road, where your friend was born. 32 Alipur Road is in Old Delhi, and it's hidden away. And now there's a big fancy park behind it, full of benches and straight-laced ladies taking their afternoon walks. But when I was a child, it was a complete wilderness. It had snakes. It had wild beasts that roared in the night. And sometimes I heard strange, strange howls coming from it like mad dogs. I longed to explore it. And my parents always used to say, you must never go there because you'll be bitten by a cobra. I never believed them because I felt that if I went there, cobras would understand that I was a decent child and they wouldn't bite me and they'd love me and they'd curl around my feet and do exactly what I wanted them to do. Of course, this was rubbish, and the first time I ever did go in there on my own, I was scared out of my wits because I went to an old disused well, looked down it, and what did I see? I saw a Russell viper, which is a snake that has rainbow colours all along it, lying down at the bottom of the well, looking up at me with a very evil smile. Well, I wasn't the kind of child who was going to be put off by the sight of a snake. I was determined to explore that wilderness, and I was determined to understand its power. So I persuaded my poor unfortunate nurse called Mary, who I'm afraid I made undergo many terrible things during my childhood, to accompany me one evening into the wilderness. She was trembling with fear and shaking and praying to the Virgin Mary and crying out and eating beetle juice and clutching my arm. This was clearly the most frightening thing that she had ever done in her life, apart from crossing the road in Delhi, which is frightening enough. It was a wonderful red gold dusk, and I would wish for every one of you to see an Indian red gold dusk. It's like red gold ink staining everything. So as this red gold dust deepened and Mary trembled and shook and Beetlejuice ran down her neck, I walked with her into the wilderness, and we came to a clearing. And there in the clearing was dancing a whole group of peacocks. And I just stopped, and even Mary stopped. We just gazed and drank in through our eyes that astounding rich beauty. I don't know if you've ever seen peacocks dance, but when peacocks dance, they open all their tail behind them in a great fan of glorious colour. And every time I feel sad or defeated or in despair, I remember those dancing peacocks. It is as if God smiled at me in that wilderness, and I saw the dazzling white of God's teeth laughing. I want to tell you another story about 32 Alipur Road in Delhi. Around that house, there were a cluster of old tombs, and no one knew really how old they were. They were crumbling and dirty and full of strange animals and bits of old newspaper. Again, I was told that I must never go in them because there were strange people lurking in them, or bad fairies who would do terrible things to me. God knows adults always invent appalling reasons for you not to do the things they don't want you to do. But I was in love with those tombs. I was in love with the wonderful ornaments around their doorways, with the bits of old jewels that still were clustered into their surfaces, and I was in love with the romance of them and the smells that seemed to come from them, the smells of old stone rotting in the sun. So I used to spend an awful lot of time exploring them on my own. And one day I came to a tomb that I had never been to before, and in the middle of the tomb there was a grave, and on that grave, as I walked through the door, there were hundreds of rich red roses that had been scattered there. And then I saw an old man crying in the corner of the tomb. He was hunched over and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. He had little pointed ears and black hair, which was clearly dyed, and he had a pair of spectacles that were stuck together with sellotape. He was a very strange figure indeed. And I watched him crying, and then I went up to him and I said, "Why are you so sad?" Because I hated to see anybody sad. And he said, "I'm weeping for my friend." And I said, "What friend? Where is your friend? What happened to your friend?" And he said, "My friend died 600 years ago, and he's buried here, and I come every day and I pour roses on his grave because I miss him so, and the smell of the roses reminds me of the beauty of his heart. So when I smell them, at least, even if he is not here, the beauty of his heart is with me." And I realized something then, which is that you can love beyond space and time, and that when you love beyond space and time, you enter into a world where everything opens onto beauty and glory. I hope by now that you all want to go to India. And if you do go to India, I mean when you do go to India, make sure that you see the Taj Mahal. Remember those two words, Taj Mahal, and just say them quietly to yourself, because there's so much magic, mystery and beauty in the sound of the words. And if you say the words, you'll have some idea of the beauty of the building itself. When I was 6 years old, I was taken by my Muslim driver to see it. I was so excited in the car, I can't tell you. And he sat there in his dark khaki uniform with his peak cap, and he told me the story of the making of the building. Many centuries ago, he said, an emperor loved his wife so much that when she died, he fell into the most terrible grief. And he had a dream, and in his dream a voice said to him, "Make for your dead wife the most beautiful building in the entire world, so that the whole world can feel how beautiful she was and how deep your longing for her still is, so that the whole world can come to this building and be overwhelmed by the greatness of the love she gave you and the love you feel for her." The emperor knew that this voice had come from God, and so being a holy man and a passionate man, and a man who had infinite resources and infinite wealth, he began a long journey to creating the Taj Mahal. He looked all over the world for the architect with the vision to make the most beautiful building in the world, and he found an Italian, and he brought him to India. Then when the drawing had been finished, he cut off the architect's hand so he could never design anything again. And he went all over the world himself and looked for all the precious materials that he would need to make the building as splendid as possible. He went to the Caucasus in Russia and found strange green marbles that he could set in the front of the building. He ransacked Burma for wonderful jewels. He looked into the deepest recesses of his own treasury and sorted out through all the different emeralds the ones that had the purest green. And he collected all of these magnificences together, and he studded the forefront of the Taj with precious jewels. And because the Taj is built on rainy soil, he was terrified that when he had built this great building, it would sink into the soil. So he looked through all the forests of Asia for a wood that was hard enough to set into the ground to be the foundation of the Taj. And he found that wood in a forest in remote Burma. And do you know, to this day, that wood has never decayed and the Taj has never shifted. So all the wealth of all the world, all the beauty of all the world, all the resources of all the world were poured by this emperor into the building of this building so that his love could shine forever. And as my driver talked, I could see that his eyes were filling with tears, because for him, this building wasn't just a beautiful work of art, it was a prayer. So I was very prepared to have a great experience when I eventually saw the Taj. But nobody can actually prepare you for the experience of going through the red sandstone doorway and looking across the amazing garden full of glittering pools of water at this intensely white marble tomb that rises like mist from the earth. As I walked up the marble steps into the doorway of the Taj Mahal, my driver said to me, "There's another mystery that you must know about this building. And that is that there are 2 tombs for the Empress Mumtaz Mahal, for whom this building was built. There is one tomb, which is the tomb that you're going to see now, which is incredibly beautiful and decorated and elaborate. And that is the tomb that the emperor wanted to share with everybody else, But she isn't actually buried in that tomb. That's just for show. There's another tomb, a secret tomb, which is now open, which I will take you to, where you will really experience the whole meaning of this building. So we walked around the upper tomb, which has a perforated marble screen all around it through which the light was pouring, and has birds and animals in precious stones encrusted on it. And I saw old ladies weeping by the tomb, and young girls coming and placing garlands of red flowers on the tomb. And it was amazing to feel that after all these centuries, that building had created such a legend that people would come and worship love there. So I drank in the beauty of the upper tomb, but I knew it did not contain her body. And then when I was ready, my driver said, "Come with me." And he took me to a little doorway by the side of the tomb and down some very, very dark steps into a very, very dark room in which there was nothing at all, but a white slab of marble with a hole at the top of it. And I said to my driver, "What was there?" And he said, "You know what he placed there? What Shah Jahan, the emperor, placed there in honor of his wife Taj Mahal. He placed there the greatest diamond in the whole universe, the Koh-i-Noor, because that was the most precious thing he had, and that was the only thing he felt that could symbolize the depth of his passion for his wife." He then told me that the Koh-i-Noor was now in the crown of the Queen of England, who, as he said, knows a good diamond when she sees one. My driver saw how moved I was, and he put his hands on my shoulder and he said, "You and I will never have the Koh-i-Noor to give away, but we all have a diamond within us that we can offer to love, and the meaning of our life is to find that diamond and to offer it with joy." Remember the story I told you about the old man weeping by the side of a tomb covered with roses, weeping for his friend who'd been dead for 600 years? Well, now I know the meaning of that story for myself, because I have a friend who's been dead since 1273, and whom I love more than anyone else in my life, and who has helped me more than anyone else in my life. I know that sounds strange, but one day you'll realize just how unstrange it really is, because there is no space and no time in true love. This man's name is Rumi, and he lived between 1207 and 1273 in southern Turkey, and he wrote the most beautiful poetry that the world has ever seen. His poetry was his Koh-i-Noor that he laid at the feet of the beloved, and his poetry has inspired millions of people throughout all these centuries to go on the journey into the depths of themselves and uncover their own diamond. Now let me tell you one of my favorite stories from Rumi, which will save your life if you really understand it, and you can and you will. One of the things that really destroys human happiness is people pretending that they know the exclusive truth about life. We are all travelers and wanderers, and we all should remain humble, and we should all tolerate everybody else's point of view. And this is a story that makes that very, very clear. There were a group of rather wacky Indians who decided to have a good joke on everybody. And so they took a huge elephant into a huge dark room and set up an exhibition of an elephant that nobody had ever seen. Everybody came into this dark room, of course, because they were all thrilled to see an elephant, but it was so dark that they had to use their hands to try and explore what this strange beast standing in that dark room really was like. Naturally, of course, after a few little explorations, everybody who came into the room thought that they had the whole truth about the elephant. One man rushed out and said, "Well, I know what an elephant is like." An elephant is like a water pipe, and that's because he put his hand on his trunk. Another had touched just a little bit of his ear. So he rushed out very confident and said, well, of course, an elephant is like an enormous fan. A fat lady who had been embracing the leg of the elephant rushed out and said, you're all talking total rubbish. The form of the elephant is obvious. It's like a pillar. And there was another man who had put his hand on the back of the elephant, who walked out very, very calmly and said, you're all so stupid it makes me sick. The elephant is like a throne, and that's that. At this point, Rumi himself enters with a big flaming torch which lights up the whole elephant. And all of these silly people who were so confident that their description was the right one and the only one looked at this great beast and started to laugh, and all their differences vanished. There's another wonderful story that drives this point home. There's a man, and he gives $1 to 4 different people. And one of them, who's a Persian, says, I want to buy some angur with that. The second man is an Arab, and he says, I want inab, not angur, you idiot. The third's a Turk, and he says, this is my money and I don't want inab, I want uzum. The fourth, a Greek, shouts, shut up, you idiots, I want Israfil. They all go crazy. They start to hit each other and beat each other about the head. They scream and shout and fall on the floor. They batter each other with their fists because they don't know that all the words that they're using just mean one thing. Grapes. And then Rumi comes along and says, what you really need is someone who knows the essential thing, and when you know that, all the different words just vanish into silence. This is a story I really love because it's a story about a big potato, Moses, who's a great hot prophet, who thinks that he knows absolutely everything there is to know about God and finds out, of course, that he doesn't know a bloody thing. One day Moses was stomping up and down being a prophet and being very grand and thinking he's marvelous, and he saw a shepherd, and the shepherd was praying, and he went up to the shepherd to try and hear what the shepherd was saying, and this is what he heard. Oh God, I love you, I love you, I love you. Who are you? I want to become your servant. I want to sew your shoes and comb your hair. Oh, I wish I could wash your clothes and kill your lice and bring you milk. I love you, I love you, I love you. I wish I could kiss your hands and rub your feet, and when you go to bed, I'd love to clean and sweep your little chamber. Moses, of course, was scandalized at this. He thought this guy had really lost it. So he went up to him, and he shook him, and he said, how dare you, you miserable little worm, talk to the great God of the universe as if he was some kind of stupid old lord of the village. The great God of the universe doesn't have feet or legs. You can't sweep his room. You can't feed him milk. You're just an ignorant, stupid, vain, ghastly little worm, and you have brought terrible darkness into the world. The shepherd, of course, was scared out of his mind. Here was the big potato, Moses, telling him that he had done some terrible wrong. So he tore his clothes, he fell on the ground, he begged the prophet's forgiveness, and he ran out into the desert, screaming. At which point, God appeared to Moses and said, Moses, you have done a terrible thing. You have tried to separate one of the people who loved me most in all the world from me. What does it matter what words he uses? He uses the words that come from his heart, and he loves me in the terms of his mind and his life and his heart. And that is wonderful, and that is everything. And you who think you know everything have now caused me tremendous pain. So Moses fell on the floor himself, just as the shepherd had done, and begged God's forgiveness. And God said, yes, I will forgive you. But I want you to go to that shepherd, and I want you to sit with him in the desert and see if you can learn from him something of the beauty of heart that makes him love me so. And Moses went into the desert and found the shepherd and told him what God had said. And the two of them sat together, and a great peace came and covered them both. Here is one last story from my friend Rumi. This story is about a quarrel between two groups of painters, one from China and the other from Byzantium, who lived in the court of a sultan, a king. Every morning they would come in their paint-splattered robes before the king, and each group would claim to be the greatest painters in the world. The Byzantines would say, "We are by far the greatest painters." And then the Chinese would pick up their silken robes and toss their noses in the air and say, "We are by far the greatest painters in the world." This went on and on and on, day after day after day, until the Sultan grew very bored indeed with these two quarrelling groups. He decided that what was needed was to have a competition, to settle the matter once and for all. Now, in the palace the Sultan had a great big room with two wonderful walls at either end, perfectly suited for painting. So he ordered a curtain to be placed in the center of the room, and the right-hand wall he gave to the Chinese, and the left-hand wall he gave to the Byzantines. And he smiled and he said, "Now, both of you, get to it and paint me the most wonderful painting you can possibly paint, so I can at last decide which of you are the greatest painters." The Chinese started to paint immediately, and they ordered the Sultan to send them precious jewels from his treasury so that they could crush them and make marvelous colors out of them. And they worked with the finest brushes, and they had minstrels come in and sing to them so that they would be inspired. After 2 frantic months, the Chinese decided that they were finished, and they went to the Sultan and told him so. And then the Sultan came to where the Byzantines were and asked them, "Have you finished?" And the Byzantines smiled secretly and said, "Yes, Sultan, I think we have." And so the Sultan went into the part of the room where the Chinese had painted and saw on their wall this amazing painting of landscapes and seas and flying ducks and women with wonderful silk coiffures. And he was amazed and fell on his knees and said, "This must be the most beautiful painting that there has ever been in the whole world. I am so lucky to have such glorious painters in my court." The Chinese were incredibly smug and sat smiling. At that moment, the curtain between the Chinese part of the room and the Byzantine part of the room was slowly drawn back. And the Sultan turned his head. And what do you imagine he saw? He didn't actually see a painting, because the Byzantines hadn't painted anything at all. What they had done was polish the wall so intensely that it had become a shining, dazzling, brilliant mirror. And in that mirror was reflected the painting of the Chinese, and reflected so marvelously that all the colors that were incredibly beautiful in the Chinese painting were even more incredibly beautiful on the wall that the Byzantines had polished, and all the beautiful women with their silken hairdos in the Chinese part of the painting looked even more ravishing in the reflection on the wall of the Byzantines. And so the Sultan said, "You Byzantines know the great secret of painting, because you know that if you polish the wall of your inmost being, the whole glory of the creation will be reflected there more beautifully even than in the outside world." Perhaps my favorite friend, apart from Rumi, is a mad man who lived in the 14th century in southern Turkey, a guy called Mullah Nasruddin, whose entire purpose in life was to tell great jokes and to annoy as many people as possible. Nasruddin used to take his donkey across a frontier every day, loaded with baskets full of straw. And every day he passed the frontier, he would say, "I'm a smuggler." And the frontier guards would search him. They used to strip him, they used to sift the straw, steep it in water, and sometimes even burn it. Meanwhile, Nasruddin was becoming wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. Then many years later, Nasruddin retired and went to live in another country, and happened to meet one of the frontier guards in a bar somewhere. "Okay, Nasruddin," he said, "you can tell me now. What on earth were you smuggling all that time when we could never catch you out?" "Donkeys," said Nasruddin. One day a terribly cruel and famously vicious king said to Nasruddin, "I am going to have you hanged, drawn and quartered if you do not prove that you have insights as deep as those that people say you have." At once Nasruddin said, "I can see a vast golden bird in the sky when I look up, and demons howling and dancing in the earth when I look down." "How can you do this?" the king asked him. "Fear," said Nasruddin, "is all you need." One day, Nasruddin was starving and went to a cafe and started to fill his mouth with food using both hands. A friend of his was passing and stopped. "Why eat with 2 hands, Mullah?" "Because I haven't got 3. And now, let me read to you a prayer that the great Prophet Muhammad gave to the whole of humanity. "O beloved, give me light in my heart, and light in my tongue, and light in my hearing, and light in my seeing, and light in my feeling, and light in every part of my body, and light before me and light behind me. Give me, I beg you, light on my right hand, and light on my left hand, and light above me, and light beneath me. Make light grow within me, and give me light, and illuminate me."
Thank you for listening to The Feather in Your Heart by Andrew Harvey, with music by Steve Gorn and Ty Burho. This program was produced by Windhorse Productions, www.windhorse.com. For more titles in the series Secrets of the World, visit www.storytrade.com or call Sounds True at 1-800-333-9185.